chosen one. Listen to me carefully. You made it, not because someone handed it to you, not because the road was smooth, not because the universe decided to be kind to you one morning and lay down roses at your feet. You made it because you refused, absolutely refused, to let the weight of everything that was trying to destroy you become the thing that defined you. You made it through the darkest chapter of your life. And you did it without applause, without an audience, without anyone in the front row holding up a sign saying, "We believe in you." You did it in the most sacred and brutal way a human being can survive anything. You did it in silence. And that silence, that is not emptiness. That silence is armor. That silence is gold. Let me take you back for a moment, because you need to hear this. You need to feel this in your chest like a fire being lit after years of cold. There was a season in your life, maybe it was recent, maybe it's still yesterday in your memory, where everything seemed to be collapsing at once, where the people you loved most couldn't seem to look you in the eye, where the dreams you had built so carefully started crumbling at the foundation, and you were standing there with your bare hands trying to hold them together, where you woke up some mornings and the first thought you had wasn't excitement or peace. It was the crushing weight of everything that had gone wrong, and everything that still needed to be fixed. You know that season. You lived it. You breathed it. Some nights you barely slept inside it. And the most brutal part? Nobody around you truly understood what you were carrying. They saw the surface. They saw you functioning, going to work, replying to messages, showing up when you were supposed to show up. They saw the version of you that had learned to walk straight even when everything inside you was leaning sideways. They didn't see the private battles, the questions that haunted you at 3 a.m., the moments in the mirror when you looked at yourself and wondered if you were strong enough to keep going, the times you sat in your car, in a parking lot, in the dark, and just stayed there, because you needed a moment where nobody needed anything from you. That was the test, chosen one. And here is what nobody tells you about the hardest tests of your life. They don't come announced. They don't come with a warning label or a clear start date or a finish line you can see from where you're standing. They come disguised as ordinary pain, disguised as betrayal, disguised as failure, disguised as loss, disguised as the slow, grinding experience of watching things fall apart while you're still trying to hold your smile together for the world. That was the test, and you didn't know it at the time, but every single day you chose to keep going, you were passing it. Every morning you dragged yourself out of bed when staying down would have been easier. You passed. Every time someone misunderstood you and you swallowed your truth instead of spilling fire you didn't have the energy to control, you passed. Every time you sat with your pain alone, in the quiet of a room no one else entered, and you didn't let that pain make you bitter, you passed. Every time you kept your promises to yourself, even when everyone else had broken theirs to you, you passed. You passed the test that was specifically designed to make you fail, because that's what made it the hardest test of your life. It wasn't just hard in the ordinary way, it was personally designed. It hit everything that was most vulnerable in you, your sense of worth, your trust in people, your belief in the future, your relationship with yourself. It targeted the core of who you are, and it asked you over and over again, in 100 different circumstances, will you still stand? Will you still believe? Will you still choose yourself? And you did. You did every single time. Now here's the part I need you to really sit with. You won in silence. In a world that worships noise, that rewards public declarations, that gives attention to those who perform their pain and broadcast their victories, you did something far more powerful. You did the real work where nobody was watching. You healed where nobody could see. You rebuilt yourself without asking for an audience. You kept the most sacred parts of your journey private, protected and personal. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand the kind of strength that requires? Anyone can be brave when people are watching. Anyone can push through when someone is cheering them on, when someone is standing beside them holding the torch. But to do it alone, to face the darkest version of your circumstances with nothing but your own conviction and whatever fire God placed inside you before you were born, that is a completely different level of human strength. That is the chosen path, and it chooses only those who are ready for it, even when they don't feel ready, even when they're shaking, even when they're unsure, even when they're sitting in that parking lot at midnight wondering if any of this is worth it. It chose you. And now, on the other side of that storm, I need you to see something clearly. The silence that carried you through, it was never weakness. The people who misread your peace as defeat, who interpreted your quietness as giving up, who thought your stillness meant you had nothing left, they were watching the surface of an ocean and mistaking the calm water for shallowness. They didn't know that underneath you the entire ocean was moving, rebuilding, healing, gathering itself for something extraordinary. That's what the silence was. It wasn't surrender, it was preparation. While they were watching you and writing your story as a tragedy, you were rewriting it entirely. While they were predicting your collapse, you were laying a foundation they couldn't even see. While they moved on from you, assumed you were finished, took their energy elsewhere, you were becoming, silently, powerfully, permanently. And now look where you stand. You are not the same person who entered that storm. Let me be very clear about that. The version of you that walked into the hardest season of your life, that person was already strong, already worthy, already remarkable. But the version of you that walked out, that person has been tested by fire. That person has been stretched beyond what they thought possible and discovered they did not break. That person has proven, not to the world, but to themselves, which is the only proof that ever truly matters, that they are capable of surviving what was designed to end them. That changes you, not in the way that makes you hard or cold or closed off. No, it changes you in the way that makes you unshakable. Because now you actually know, from lived experience, not theory, that you can endure, you can lose things and still stand, you can be misunderstood and still maintain your truth, you can walk through darkness and still find your way to morning. Nobody can take that knowledge from you. Nobody can argue you out of what you have personally lived through and survived. That is your power now. And chosen one, I want to speak to something else, to the loneliness that came with it. Because there is a specific kind of loneliness that belongs to people who carry big things quietly. It's not the loneliness of isolation. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling completely unseen, of wanting so desperately to share what you're carrying, but knowing that most of the people around you don't have the capacity to hold it with you, of learning, often the hard way, who is built for depth and who is built only for your sunshine. That loneliness was real. Don't minimize it. Don't pretend it didn't cost you something. There were connections that didn't survive the version of you that was being forged in that season. There were people who showed you who they really were when your circumstances stopped being convenient for them. And losing that, even when those people weren't truly serving your growth, still hurt. Because you are human. Because you loved. Because you were loyal even when loyalty wasn't returned to you in equal measure. But here's the truth underneath that pain. Every relationship that couldn't hold the weight of your real self was making space. Every person who stepped back was clearing the room for something and someone more aligned with who you are becoming. The loneliness wasn't punishment, it was preparation for a different kind of companionship, the kind that comes when you have become so fully yourself that you naturally attract people who can meet you there. You weren't being abandoned, you were being selected. And now on the other side, you can see it differently. You can see who remained, who stayed through the quiet, who kept showing up not because your life looked impressive, but because they actually loved you, the real you, not just the version of you that had everything together. Hold those people close. They passed a test too, and they may not even know it. Now let's talk about what comes next, because this is where so many people who survive the hardest seasons of their lives make a mistake. They survive the storm, they find themselves standing on solid ground again, and then they minimize what they went through. They rush back into the noise. They cover the chapters of their journey too quickly, not wanting to appear weak or wounded. They perform recovery instead of actually inhabiting it. Don't do that. You are allowed to stand here, in this moment of having survived, and actually feel the weight of what you have accomplished. You are allowed to acknowledge, to yourself, in private, in the silence that has become your most sacred space, that what you went through was genuinely hard, that it cost you something real, That the fact that you are still here, still standing, still choosing, is not small. It is enormous. It is one of the most significant things you have ever done. Give yourself that. Give yourself the recognition that the world may have never offered you and may never offer you, because you know the truth. And the truth is that you did something remarkable. You held yourself together when everything was designed to make you fall apart. You stayed true to who you are in a season that was pressuring you in 100 different ways to become someone less. You remained. And in remaining, you won. So now, what do you do with the person you have become? You build. Quietly, deliberately, powerfully. You take everything the storm stripped away, and you don't rebuild what was there before. You build what belongs to who you are now, because you are not going back. The version of your life that existed before the test cannot fully contain the version of you that came out of it. You need a bigger vision, wider roads, deeper roots. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not ready to understand your level of depth. You stop shrinking into spaces that were never designed for your actual size. You stop apologizing for surviving. You stop whispering truths that deserve to be lived boldly. Not loudly, remember, your power lives in the silence, but boldly, with the full weight of a person who has been tested and has not been found lacking. You invest in the things that actually matter. You pour energy into relationships that are real. You pursue the work that lights something up in you. You protect your peace the way someone protects something they almost lost, with extraordinary intention and zero apology. You allow yourself to want more, not out of desperation or scarcity, but out of the deep knowing that you are capable of more, and that the season of surviving is now making way for the season of thriving. There is a difference between surviving and thriving, and you have earned the right to understand that difference from the inside. And perhaps most importantly, you carry the lesson of the silence forward, because the silence taught you something that most people spend their entire lives never learning. It taught you that your worth is not measured by who is watching, that your progress doesn't require an audience to be real, that the most powerful things you will ever do in your life will probably happen in rooms where nobody else is present, in the early mornings, in the late nights, in the private conversations with yourself where you choose to keep going one more time. That is the chosen path. It is not glamorous, it is not always celebrated, but it is the path that leads somewhere worth arriving at. And you found it not because everything was easy, but because everything was hard, and you chose to keep walking anyway. Chosen one, the hardest test of your life is over. You passed it in silence. You passed it alone. You passed it on days when you weren't sure you could. You passed it in ways the world will never fully see or know or celebrate, but you know. And somewhere deeper than thought, somewhere in the part of you that has always known what you were made of even before the test confirmed it, you have always known you were built for this, not for the suffering, never for the suffering, but for the overcoming, for the endurance, for the transformation that only comes through the kind of fire that most people run from and that you chose, over and over again, to stand in. Now rise, not with noise, not with performance, not to prove anything to anyone who doubted you. Rise in the way that the chosen rise, with quiet certainty, with deep roots, with eyes that have seen darkness and have chosen light anyway. Rise, chosen one. Your season has changed, and you are ready. Chosen one, the first thing you need to understand, and understand it deeply, is that what you went through was not random. It was not bad luck. It was not the universe being careless with your life. What came for you in that season came with precision. It knew exactly where to hit. It knew exactly which doors to close, which people to move, which dreams to delay, which fears to activate. It didn't attack you generally, it attacked you specifically. That is what separated this test from ordinary hardship. Ordinary hardship is heavy but broad. It lands on the surface and bruises what is visible. But the test you survived, it went deeper than that. It reached into the most private parts of who you are, the parts you rarely show anyone, and it applied pressure there. It targeted your self-worth, that quiet inner voice that tells you whether you are enough, whether you matter, whether your presence in this world means something. It shook that voice. It made it unsteady, and on certain days, in certain moments, it almost silenced it completely. Then it moved to your trust, not just trust in other people, though that too was broken in ways that cost you sleep and peace and comfort, but trust in the process. Trust that doing the right thing leads somewhere good. Trust that loyalty is returned, that effort is rewarded, that good people are protected. The test cracked that trust deliberately, because without it, moving forward feels not just difficult but pointless. It wanted you to stop believing. It needed you to stop believing to win. And then it came for your belief in the future. That vision you carried, the quiet hope of what your life could become, it made that feel foolish, naive, out of reach. It surrounded you with enough evidence of failure, enough silence from the universe, enough closed doors in a row, that holding on to hope started to feel like a form of delusion. It was surgical, intentional, deeply personal. And here is the most important thing, the thing that changes everything when you truly absorb it. You were not chosen for this test because you were weak. You were chosen because something in you was strong enough to survive it and be transformed by it. The weight was calibrated to your capacity. The pressure was proportional to the power waiting on the other side of it. It was hard because you were built for hard, and you proved it by still being here. Chosen one, let me tell you something about silence that the world has completely misunderstood. The world is loud. It rewards loudness. It gives attention to those who perform their pain publicly, who broadcast every struggle, who turn their wounds into content and their healing into a show. The world sees noise and calls it strength. It sees stillness and calls it surrender. It sees quiet and assumes there is nothing happening underneath it. The world was wrong about you. While they were waiting for you to break publicly, to collapse in a way they could witness and confirm, you were doing something far more powerful in private. You were healing in the dark. You were rebuilding in rooms no one else entered. You were having conversations with yourself that no one else was invited to. Conversations about who you are, what you will and will not accept, what you are still willing to believe in, what kind of person you are choosing to become on the other side of everything that tried to unmake you. That work, that invisible, unglamorous, deeply personal work, was the most important work of your life. And you did it without an audience. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand what that says about the quality of your character? Most people cannot sit in silence with their own pain. Most people reach immediately for distraction, for noise, for anything that stops them from having to face what is actually happening inside them. They fill every quiet moment with something external because the internal is too uncomfortable, too confronting, too heavy to sit with alone. They perform healing before they have actually healed. They announce their growth before the roots have gone deep enough to hold. You did the opposite. You went inward when everything in the culture around you was pushing you outward. You stayed quiet when the easier and more socially rewarded path was to be loud about what you were going through. You protected the process. You guarded the sacred space of your own transformation and refused to let it become a performance. And the people who watched from the outside, the ones who saw your stillness and interpreted it as stagnation, who saw your silence and read it as defeat, who assumed that because you were not announcing your progress you must not be making any, they were making the most fundamental error of judgment a person can make. They were looking at the surface of the ocean and declaring it shallow because they could not see the depth from where they were standing. But the ocean was moving, chosen one. Underneath that calm, underneath that quiet, underneath the stillness they mistook for emptiness, everything was in motion. Healing was happening. Clarity was arriving slowly, the way it always arrives when it is real. Not in a sudden flood, but in a quiet, steady accumulation of small truths that eventually become an unshakable knowing. Strength was being built not in the visible, performative way, but in the deep structural way. The kind that does not collapse under pressure because it was forged under pressure. Your silence was not the absence of something. It was the presence of everything that mattered. It was discipline. It was dignity. It was the refusal to let your most sacred process be cheapened by turning it into something people could scroll past and double tap and forget by morning. It was the understanding, perhaps instinctive, perhaps hard-won, that the most powerful things in life grow in private, before they are ever visible in public. Roots go down before branches go out. Foundation is laid before walls rise. The silence was the root system. The silence was the foundation. And now look, everything built in that silence is standing. Everything protected in that quiet is real. Everything healed in private is whole in a way that public healing rarely produces. Because you did not perform recovery. You actually recovered. You did not announce transformation. You actually transformed. And what is real, what is genuinely built, what is truly healed, that does not shake when the world tests it again. They could not see what was coming because they could not see where it was being built. But it was always being built, in the silence, in the stillness, in you, chosen one. There is a specific kind of pain that belongs only to this experience, the pain of watching people leave during the season when you needed presence the most. Not strangers, not acquaintances you barely knew, people you had history with, people you had laughed with, trusted with, built memories with, shown the parts of yourself you rarely show anyone. People whose absence, when it came, didn't just feel like loss. It felt like confirmation of your worst fear, that maybe you were too much, that maybe you were not enough, that maybe the version of you that was struggling, that was broken at the edges, that was asking more from life and from relationships than comfortable circumstances require. Maybe that version was simply too heavy for anyone to stay beside. That pain was real. Don't let anyone minimize it. Don't minimize it yourself, because there is a narrative that gets applied too quickly to the experience of people leaving. This idea that you should immediately reframe it as a blessing, immediately be grateful, immediately see the silver lining before you have even fully felt the loss. And while the reframe is true, rushing to it too quickly dishonors what the leaving actually cost you. It cost you comfort. It cost you familiarity. It cost you the particular kind of security that comes from knowing there are people in your corner who have known you long enough to understand your context, your history, your patterns, people who don't require you to explain yourself from the beginning every single time. Losing that was not small. Sit with that truth before you move to the next one. And now, the next truth. Every single person who stepped away from you during that season was doing something they did not know they were doing. They were not making a conscious choice to serve your growth. They were not thinking about your future or your becoming or what was waiting for you on the other side of the storm. They were simply responding to their own limitations, their own discomfort with depth, their own inability to sit beside someone in genuine pain without flinching, their own preference for the version of you that was easier, lighter, less demanding of real presence and real love. But the effect of their leaving, regardless of their intention, was sacred. They cleared the room. Think about what that means. Think about what a room looks like when it is too full of the wrong things. There is no space to breathe, no space to move freely, no space for anything new to enter because every corner is already occupied. Relationships that are not aligned with who you truly are function exactly like that. They fill the space with noise, with performance, with the exhausting work of maintaining a version of yourself that fits their comfort rather than your truth. And when those relationships leave, when those people step back, the room gets quiet, and in that quiet there is suddenly space. Space to breathe, space to be exactly who you are without editing, space to attract something different, something that does not require you to shrink, to perform, to manage how much of yourself you reveal at any given moment. That space felt like loneliness. And it was loneliness, but it was loneliness with a function, loneliness with a direction, loneliness that was actively preparing the conditions for something more real than what it replaced. Because here is what also happened while the room was being cleared. You were changing. The person who was walking through that hard season was not static. You were being shaped, refined, deepened by everything you were enduring. Your capacity for real conversation was growing. Your tolerance for surface-level connection was shrinking. Your understanding of what you actually need from another human being, not what you were taught to accept, not what was convenient, not what was simply familiar, was becoming sharper and more honest with every day that passed. And here is the collision that happens when you change deeply, but your relationships remain the same. The relationships stop fitting, not because anyone is villainous, Not because the people who left were bad people, but because a deeper version of you requires a deeper quality of connection. And people who were comfortable with the previous version, who had built their relationship with you around a dynamic that no longer reflected who you were becoming, naturally fell away. The fit was gone, and when the fit is gone, the staying requires a kind of effort and intentionality that not everyone is willing to give. The ones who stayed, look at them, really look at them. They are not perfect. They probably said the wrong thing sometimes, probably didn't fully understand what you were going through, probably had moments where they too were limited in what they could offer, but they stayed, through the quiet, through the difficulty, through the version of you that was harder to be around because it was more honest, more raw, more real than the version they had always known. They chose to remain when remaining required actual love, rather than just comfortable habit. Those people are your people, not because they passed some test you designed for them, but because the season itself was the test, and they passed it simply by not leaving. And the connections that are still coming, the ones you have not yet met, the ones being drawn toward the person you are still becoming, they are coming precisely because the room was cleared, because you are now someone different, because the transformation that happened in the silence, in the loneliness, in the painful process of watching certain people step away, that transformation made you visible to a completely different quality of human being. People who do not need you to be less, people who are not threatened by your depth, people who have done their own hard seasons, their own silent rebuilding, and who recognize in you the particular quality that only comes from having been genuinely tested. You were not abandoned, chosen one. You were filtered, refined, selected down to what was real and prepared, through the very pain of that loneliness, for what is coming that will be realer still. The room had to be cleared, and now there is space, and what fills that space next will be worthy of exactly who you have become. Chosen one, you survived. And I need you to feel the full weight of that word before we move anywhere beyond it. Survived. Not coasted through, not breezed past, not skipped over with minimal damage. You survived, which means there were moments where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, where the margin between staying and breaking was razor thin, where the only thing that kept you moving was something so deep inside you that you couldn't even name it at the time. You just kept going because something in you refused to stop. That is survival in its most honest and raw form. And it is remarkable. But here is the truth that survival itself will never tell you, because survival is too busy keeping you alive to concern itself with what comes after. Surviving is not the finish line. It is the starting line of something else entirely. And this is where so many people who have walked through the hardest seasons of their lives make a mistake that costs them the very transformation they worked so hard and suffered so deeply to earn. They survive the storm. They find solid ground beneath their feet again. They feel the relief of still being standing. And then, almost immediately, they rush. They rush back into noise because the quiet of survival feels too unfamiliar after so much internal chaos. They rush back into busyness because stillness reminds them of the season they are trying to leave behind. They rush back into performance because the world is still watching, and the world has a very short tolerance for people who are visibly in process. And in that rushing, they make the most heartbreaking error available to a person who has just survived something significant. They minimize it. They cover it quickly. They wrap it up neatly and file it away and present to the world a version of themselves that says, "I'm fine now, I'm back, everything is normal," before they have actually arrived at fine, before they have actually come back to themselves, before anything close to normal has been genuinely rebuilt from the inside out. They perform recovery instead of living it, and performing recovery is its own kind of exhaustion, because you are carrying the weight of what you actually went through underneath the performance of having processed it. You are smiling with your face while your interior is still sitting in the rubble, still sorting through what happened, still trying to understand what it meant and what it cost and what it changed. The gap between the performance and the reality becomes its own private pain, this loneliness of appearing healed while still actively healing, of presenting wholeness while still quietly gathering the pieces. Don't do that to yourself. You have already carried enough weight that wasn't meant to be carried in silence. Your healing does not need to become another thing you manage alone while presenting something different to the world. Here is what you actually need to understand about where you are standing right now. The person who walked into that storm and the person who walked out of it are not the same. This is not a metaphor. This is not motivational language designed to make you feel better about what you lost. This is a literal, structural truth about what genuine suffering followed by genuine survival actually does to a human being. It changes the architecture, it rewires things, it removes certain capacities, the capacity for certain kinds of naivety, for certain kinds of trust given too freely, for certain kinds of hope that was never grounded in reality, and it builds others. Depth, discernment, a tolerance for discomfort that most people around you will never develop because they have never been asked to sit in it as long as you have. You cannot pour that person back into the old life. It will not fit. Not because the old life was bad. Some of it was good, some of it was genuinely beautiful, and grief for what was lost is valid and real, but because you are larger now, deeper now. The container that held the previous version of your life was built for someone with a different set of experiences, a different understanding of themselves, a different relationship with pain and with peace. That container is too small for who you are now. So you do not rebuild what existed before the storm. You build something new, something that actually fits the dimensions of who you have become. And this is where surviving ends and thriving begins. Not in the moment the storm stopped, not in the moment you found solid ground, but in the moment you looked at the solid ground beneath your feet and decided that solid ground is not the destination, it is merely the foundation upon which you are now going to build something extraordinary. Thriving looks different from surviving in every possible way. Surviving is about making it through the day. Thriving is about designing the day intentionally. Surviving is about holding yourself together. Thriving is about expanding into who you actually are without the constant effort of containment. Surviving is about endurance, white-knuckling your way through circumstances that are painful and uncertain. Thriving is about momentum, moving forward not because you are running from something but because you are genuinely drawn towards something that excites and calls and inspires you. Thriving is also, critically, about permission. Permission you give yourself. Permission to want more than survival. Permission to pursue joy not as a reward you have not yet earned but as a natural state available to you right now, in this body, in this life, after everything you have been through. Permission to stop treating peace as a temporary condition and start treating it as a permanent foundation. Permission to invest fully in your own becoming without apologizing for the resources, time, energy, attention, money, emotional capacity that becoming requires. Because here is what the surviving season may have taught you incorrectly. It may have taught you to live small, to need little, to keep your desires modest because wanting too much and then losing it is too painful to risk again. Survival trains you to minimize your exposure to loss by minimizing your investment in outcomes. And in the season of survival, that was wisdom. It was the right calibration for the circumstances. You protected yourself by not reaching too far, by not wanting too loudly, by keeping your hopes close to the ground where the fall would be shorter. But that calibration belongs to the storm. It does not belong to the season that follows it. In the season of thriving, reaching is not reckless, it is required. Wanting is not dangerous, it is directional. Hope is not naivety, it is the engine. You are not the same person who was hurt by reaching before. You are someone who has been forged by that hurt into something stronger, wiser, more grounded and more resilient than before. Reaching now comes with roots. Wanting now comes with discernment. Hope now comes with the deep, unshakable knowing that even if it does not work out exactly as you envisioned, you will survive, because you already proved that you can. That knowing changes everything about how you move forward. So move forward, chosen one. Not frantically, not performatively, not to prove anything to anyone who watched you struggle and wondered if you would make it. Move forward for yourself, with the quiet, certain, unstoppable energy of someone who has been through the fire and come out not burned away but refined. Someone who knows the difference between what matters and what does not because the storm stripped everything unnecessary away and left only what was real. Build what belongs to who you are now. Pursue what calls to the deepest version of you. Invest in the life that fits the person you have actually become, not the person you were before, not the person others expect you to return to, but the person standing here right now, on the other side of the hardest test of your life, ready for something that survival alone was never designed to give you. The season of surviving is over. The season of thriving has already begun. And you, exactly as you are, forged exactly as you have been, are more than ready for it. Is script ki related mujhe 50 prompts banaka though Jesus ki ho church ki Bible ki ho high quality hedi ho.